Episode 11 of the WildFed podcast, Newfoundland, Food is Who We Are with Lori McCarthy, is brought to you by Surthrival. Surthrival's new line of nutraceutically advanced, organically produced CBD products are selling out fast, and that's because they work. The formula is called CBD3 because it's made from 3 CBD extracts combined into one powerful, scientifically validated formula. The first is a nano-delivered CBD that's designed to get into your cells fast. The second's a liposomally delivered CBD that stays in the body substantially longer than other CBD formulas. And the third is a traditionally made broad-spectrum hemp extract with all the benefits of the cannabis plant minus the THC. CBD3 is studied, lab-tested for purity, and delivers faster results that last longer. Surthrival is so much more than just CBD, so go to surthrival.com to see the entire lineup. Surthrival is empowerment fuel. For those of you who pre-ordered Season 1 of the WildFed TV show or signed up for our 9-week program, the Season 1 Experience, you received Episode 1 yesterday. That episode's called On the River Floodplain, and it takes place in early spring as we hunt wild turkeys and forage 2 of my favorite early spring greens, ostrich fern fiddleheads and wild leeks. We bring those ingredients to a friend and local chef, Will Holmes, at his restaurant, the Standard Gastropub, where he cooks up an unforgettable wild meal for everyone who is along on that adventure. It's a great episode, and I'm really proud of the work my team did to bring it to you. You can still order Season 1 if you'd like to watch the show. New episodes become available each Monday, so if you order Season 1 now, you'll get access to Episode 1 today, and Episode 2 would be available next Monday, and so on until all 8 episodes have been released. Also, I'm really excited to announce that our WildFed hats are now available. These trucker-style snapback hats are available on wild-fed.com. We did one in a color they call Loden, which to me is really like a classy grayish green, and I chose it because it blends in when I'm out in the field, but it's right at home in urban environments too. And we're also offering a limited release hat in Hunter Orange, since most states and provinces require you to wear at least an orange hat during the firearm season for big game, making it a perfect companion to your hunts or just to keep you safe out on the landscape during hunting season. Again, these are extremely high quality, structured, trucker-style snapback hats, and you can find them at wild-fed.com. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed Podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. Today's episode is with Lori McCarthy. If you were a listener to my last podcast, Rewild Yourself, you may remember an interview I did with her several years back. That was recorded remotely before I'd met her in person. This interview was recorded just before leaving St. John's after spending a week fishing, foraging, and shooting an episode for Season 2 of the WildFed TV show. If you're familiar with Newfoundland, you're really going to enjoy this episode, and if you aren't familiar with Newfoundland, you're really going to enjoy this episode. Newfoundland is the easternmost point of land in Canada, and it's remote enough that many of the old ways, lost in more easily accessed places, still have a foothold there. People's relationship to the land is just a bit more intact than in more southwestern areas of North America, particularly their dependence on the sea. It's a place where moose, caribou, and seal are still subsistence hunted, orange cloudberries and black crowberries are foraged, and the people speak a dialect that's unlike anything you'll hear in the Western Hemisphere. Lori is the wild food ambassador for what the locals call the Rock, but what the rest of us routinely mispronounce as Newfoundland. They're quick to point out, however, that the island is in fact called Newfoundland, and don't you dare say it like that again. When most of us think of taking a vacation, our minds often drift to warm, sunny southern beaches. But next time you're thinking of getting away, consider going northeast. There's a richness to the culture, the food, and the exquisite natural beauty of Newfoundland that just has to be experienced. So enjoy this conversation with Lori McCarthy, and if you like what you hear, consider joining her for a tour of one of the most incredible places a wild food enthusiast could visit. I'll be back next Tuesday with episode 12 of the WildFed podcast featuring upland game bird biologist Kelsey Sullivan, who'll teach us all about the wild turkey. Now enjoy this episode, recorded on location in St. John's, Newfoundland, with Lori McCarthy. I am sipping Labrador tea at 8:44 a.m. in the morning in the Canadian province of Newfoundland with, hang on, Lori, we'll get there, with my producer, Grant Giuliano, and the illustrious Lori McCarthy.
Wow.
That's good.
Yeah.
So
Sounds great.
for those listening, I don't typically podcast this time of day, so bear with me, Lori. You seem chipper.
I think that's why you said 8:30 a.m. in the morning.
Exactly.
Grant, who was able to pick up on those things, I'm very surprised.
When in doubt, use redundancies. Lori, you seem very chipper today, so you will be carrying the show for me.
Oh my God, the weight. This will be edited, right?
No, it actually won't be. Thanks for having us, Lori. This has been an incredible week. We've been here with you since last Friday. Today's Wednesday.
Yep.
You're an awesome host.
Thank
Such a
you.
good host.
Nice.
When you're on the island of Newfoundland and you bring up the topic of wild foods, there's one name associated with that, and that would be yours, Lori. You seem to be quite well known and celebrated here in the wild foods foraging kind of space, eh?
Yeah, I'll say I've been embraced by the locals. Yeah, it's been an honor, really.
How did you get started with this? Well, let's talk about your business is Cod Sounds.
Yep.
And it seems like it's kind of multifaceted. It's almost like sort of like something between a guide service and I don't know. How do you describe it? It's
Cod Sounds was an extension of my life.
Yeah.
it was a lot of what I was already doing, and it was created really to share my passion for the stuff I get up to.
Mm-hmm.
And so it very much became
Which is what? For the uninitiated.
It's heavy. No. Overall, I guess it is, just a deep appreciation for the land, the people here, and our culture.
And the food, though, I would say.
Yeah,
pretty
well,
inextricable from that.
Yeah, and food is who we are here. Food is culture. Food is why we settled. Food is so ingrained in us as a people. And I mentioned several times, like in Mom's generation, when she was growing up, like Nan and Pop spent all their time, literally all day long, thinking about food, harvesting food, processing food, thinking about the next meal, but not only the next one, but next week, next month, and in like 9 months when nothing is growing still. Right. So, yeah, food is culture, a big part of it here.
And we're sitting in your workshop now, which is, it's like 3/4, I would say, is like a food space, and 1/4 of it is a gear space, because what you're doing is a lot of going out on the landscape, harvesting stuff and bringing it back, and then a real big part of that is processing that food, turning it into meals. So you're sort of taking folks out on the landscape in addition to doing that yourself, bringing food back, processing it, and then it seems like really both doing traditional things with that food, but also really experimenting with it as well.
Yeah, most of what's left here now this time of the year is failed experiments, really, from last year. Yeah, definitely, experiment with it and seeing how far we can push the boundaries, right? And how many ways can we put this on our plate?
I'd like to talk a little bit about, where we are, I guess, geographically. Newfoundland is a really interesting place. One of the things that stands out to me is that it has its own time zone, which is a half an hour, which is 1 hour and 1/2 hour ahead of Eastern Standard Time. So it's interesting to be in North America and be out ahead of Eastern Standard Time. I'm used to thinking of ourselves as, all the way east in Maine. Not only are we further east, this must be the easternmost point of land outside of Greenland in North America, right?
Yeah, this is the most easterly point of land in Canada.
Okay, so here we are in St. John's.
Right, so we're in an island in the middle of North Atlantic. Next point of land, as the crow flies, is England.
Wow. And this part of the island is this called the Avalon, where we are?
Yeah, that's right.
So that's like a sort of oddly shaped peninsula, almost an island, off of Newfoundland.
That's right, yeah.
And then we're on that point of land, St. John's. And it's the whole island is so crenulated with bays and inlets and harbors. I mean, as we went across the coast, just all these like beautifully protected little inlets everywhere here, right? And life here seems to really revolve around the sea. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, most of the interior of Newfoundland there's no roads to it. It was never settled.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone came here and settled on the shore for fish.
Yeah. And to this day, what's it like in the interior? Are there any like cities or towns in interior?
No, we have Gander, which is pretty, we say this Gander Central Newfoundland, but it is, outside of that, there's very few communities along the way, right? It's definitely, you have to get off the main highway to get out into the bays and the communities.
And then this place has not been part of Canada all that long, which was kind of a big surprise to me too, just how recent. So were you saying in the 1940s?
49, yeah. We joined,
49, so almost 1950.
Yeah, we joined Confederation.
Okay, and today it's called the Province of Newfoundland and Labrador.
That's right.
Which I have noticed the Labrador part doesn't seem to be tremendously celebrated. It's not on the tip of everyone's tongue.
Not here.
Yeah, exactly.
And not for any reason. If you went to Labrador, Newfoundland wouldn't be on the tip of their tongue either.
Right.
It's as different as Ontario and Saskatchewan. Many of the communities here on the southern shore of Newfoundland don't have roads. They're still only accessible by ferries. But in Labrador, even more so.
Okay.
It is true, untouched, spectacular wilderness up there. Mountain ranges and just amazing.
And you're speaking your Queen's English right now, but
right, my fancy talk.
Fancy talk. But one of the things that I find particularly fascinating about this place is that it has more. I would say more than an accent. It's like a dialect of English here that's spoken.
Yeah, but if you travel around, like even on the Avalon, when you start to go south, you'll hear people down there that are as Irish as Irish.
Okay.
Yeah, and the dialects across Newfoundland. Or like we could tell, oh, you must be from, you're from the West Coast, or you're from up Great Northern Peninsula, or you know, it is really different. Mostly because there were no roads in between the communities, even.
Okay.
Right. So your language, your dialect, your culture was very isolated in unto itself,
evolving in a vacuum, kind of.
Yeah, for sure.
Grant and I have been trying to do some of the accent ourselves. It's very difficult.
No.
It's not easy. I would say, though, as an outsider to it, it smacks of Scottish, of Irish, of some UK kind of. Well, I mean, I know those are UK, but British. Yeah. And then a couple times, like when we met your friend Albert, there was for me the first night, I was getting an Australian almost lilt to it. And then the next day we were with him, I was like, okay, no, that's Newfoundland. But yeah, Grant, would you say it's kind of a real UK sound here?
Yeah, definitely.
The people here hail from the UK originally?
Yeah, mostly English and Irish.
Okay.
That's what stayed, right? The French came, the Spanish came, but the English and Irish dominantly settled here.
Okay. Also, let's talk about what this place looks like for folks who haven't been here. Flying in, Grant, it was like, what stood out to you as we were coming in?
Those ledges on the islands.
Yeah, like islands that ascend out of the sea with these cliff faces so that they sit, it must be 100, 200, 300 feet up off of the water, almost like plateaus. And then when you get to the coast, there's some of these areas at least have these really distinctive, is it granite mostly?
Yeah, I don't know.
You don't know? Yeah.
There's a ton of different geology here.
It is.
People come from all over the world to study the geology here.
Okay.
Yeah.
But beautiful cliffs. And then as we kind of come up out of the coast, you get into the forests here, which are dominated by coniferous trees like balsam firs and black spruces and tamaracks. No real hardwoods to speak of, except sort of some spotting of birches. Is that mostly around the coast, or is that interior too?
Mostly the birches interior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That one of the interesting things Grant said to me at one point is like, man, they must burn all softwoods in the fireplaces here, and they do, right?
We do, yeah. Yeah. You'll go around the bays and you'll see like massive mounds of wood. Lots of people still heat with wood, and more people are going back to it all the time.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And you were saying that chimney fires had been to me, where I live, we have so many hardwoods, so much deciduous and mixed forest. And so we burn primarily, for us, softwoods would be something we'd burn outside.
Right.
And it's because of the buildup in our chimneys and the fear of chimney fires. And you were saying that had been a problem, or has been a problem over the years.
Years ago, you'd always hear chimney fires. It was almost like a regular thing, right? Yeah. But hardwood burns so hot.
Yeah.
Right, so it cleans out.
Cleans
I'll get a load
out.
of birch every year, and I got 3 wood stoves now.
Yeah,
So.
but it's like a premium if you wanted to get some birch. That must be expensive.
Oh, it's a fortune. Yeah, it's like $200 a truckload, 8-foot bed delivered.
And then another landscape that really stands out to me are what you call the barrens here.
Yeah.
Which are these massive open spaces. I mean, where you're just seeing for miles and miles and miles over. I mean, where none of the plants are more than knee high, right? I mean,
the lakes are just scattered so beautifully.
Yeah, not even lakes, like little ponds.
But like dark, deep blue ponds.
You call them bogs.
Bogs, yeah.
Yeah, I think probably how they look and how they are when you start trying to walk through some of that is probably different.
Yeah.
They look like nicely contained little ponds.
Right.
These little, like, pearls of blue in this, like, sort of sage. What looks like it would be a sagebrush, but as you get in there, it's a lot of forbs, real low to the ground. Plants that, when you and I were out foraging in, that I recognized as bigger plants, but up there, almost like it would be in the alpine zone when you're in the mountains, everything is stunted down by, I assume, by wind conditions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that they, a plant that you're used to being knee or waist high is ankle high.
Right, like a 20-year-old, spruce tree is not even up to your waist.
Right, and just lichens kind of all on the ground.
Yeah, tons
as
of
well.
lichens here. People come from everywhere to study the lichens here. Super rare species.
Okay.
Yeah, and that color that you're seeing out on the barrens is mostly caribou moss. You talk about it looking like a sage.
Color, yeah. That like dull sagey green. Anyway, it's incredibly beautiful here. Another thing I'd say about Newfoundland is that the weather reports don't mean anything. I feel like it's just to humor you, because every single day I would check the forecast, and as I would check it throughout the day, one thing I'm not used to is that every hour I go back to it, it's different.
Yeah.
And then it wouldn't be reflected by what was actually happening outside. And then I would think, oh, tomorrow's a bust, it's going to rain all day. And then we would have like clear skies, puffy clouds, sun. And then, it would be look like it'd be sunny the next day and it'd be fog and rain, right?
Yeah.
So can you even get an accurate forecast? I mean,
no, but not really. Ask an old fisherman. You gotta ask Larry now. My buddy takes us out fishing, right? The wind direction here got everything to do with it, and the longer you hang out here, you'll notice the first thing people talk about. What way? My grandfather always said to us, even when we were little kids, like tormenting, we'd walk in and he'd say, "Now, Laurie, what way's the wind today?"
Yeah.
But life depended on the wind.
Right.
For women, it was drying fish and hanging out your laundry, and for men, it was, and still is, like, a large percentage of the island still fish and for crab and all kinds of ground fish species, and there's still a strong fishery here, and everything depends on the wind.
Yeah.
What you're doing that day is wind dependent, right? So everyone talks about it.
I enjoyed that. You'd hear people, you'd meet up with somebody and there'd be these like sort of almost an exchange of information about weather before like the conversation starts. So that was a fascinating aspect to me. And we did experience going out to see what that northeasterly wind was like, which just beat us down as we tried to get out of the harbor. And I thought, like, oh, yeah, it's important to know which way the wind is blowing.
Right, because it means either you're going on those fishing grounds or you're going south on those fishing grounds. Larry was like, oh, maybe we should go south. I don't know. No, we got to go up there to northeast wind. That's the best fishing ground.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Tell us a little bit about how you went from sort of living here to having this deep interest in the foods here and to becoming a player in the wild food community, or maybe even, I don't know if it's fair to say, sort of heading up some of that, even pioneering some of that. But
yeah, I was working in kitchens here for years. And when I decided to have a family, I had always said that I was going to take some time off work to be with the kids. And I did that. And during my time off, really early, when my daughter was born, she's 9 now, I started watching what was happening in the food scene. Before that, cooking in kitchens for me was just a place to work. The longer I spent in them, the more I realized, I guess, this lifestyle wasn't for me, right? So while I was home with my daughter, I started watching what was happening globally in food. And at the time, a name like Rene Redzepi is, synonymous with wild food, right? And watching what he was putting on the plates watching.
For context, that's Noma out in Copenhagen.
That's right. Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome, Grant.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. And he became, a very influential chef very quickly. The whole Nordic food movement up there really brought a sense of pride back to their place, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I remember watching, looking in these magazines and seeing the stuff that he was putting on the plates, and I was thinking, we have that here, we have that here, well, we have that too. So there was like an instant recognition of landscapes for me and where things grow and how things grow. And have a friend over there now. She lives over there, and she's a chef and we were talking about.
She lives over in
Denmark, in Copenhagen, yeah. And we were, talking food, and the more I just became interested in how can I combine kind of my two loves, right? Cooking and now this wild food. And I guess it was that appreciation that made me want to, share it with people, right? And so I thought, I wasn't ready to go back to work, and I thought the best place to get this kind of stuff is somewhere where people come to eat, right? And so I went to Raymond's restaurant and Chef Jeremy Charles down there, and I said, do you guys have any interest in this, putting some of this on the plates? And he was very, and still is, he's very, Newfoundland grounded minded, and really wanted to share Newfoundland flavors of Newfoundland and wild game and that. And it became this great relationship of what I could bring him and how he could use it. And, I just invested more time in sort of, exploring the landscape and what we could be doing with it. At a time, I remember growing up, and after the collapse of the fishery, we continued to tell young people, to leave Newfoundland. And that ate me.
Who was telling?
Everyone who lost their jobs and their lives in their fish.
And you're talking about, when you say the fishery, you're talking about the cod fishery,
right? Yeah, in '92 when they closed the fishery. It was a very difficult time. It cast this horrible shadow over Newfoundland, and I didn't like hearing, you should get out of here. Go find where the work is. And we've always been people who travel for work, but we've seen this mass exodus of people leave the island, taking their families and leaving, lost their lives, their whole existence that was surrounded by, subsistence fishing, right?
Yeah, I think if you're living in a city, or you're living remote from where these stories come from, and you hear about something like this, like the close of an industry, the close of a fishery, and it's really easy from the sort of ivory tower of intellectualism in the urban centers to think like, well, these people, what's the saying? You learn to code, right? Like, oh, they can just do something else. And then you come to a place like this and you see how interwoven that fishery is. You almost like, what is this place without that fishery? It's hard to separate the two things. I mean, they're just really tightly knit together. So you see how it doesn't make sense to tell these fishermen to like go do something else. Like, why it would be
in a town of like 500 people, or
right.
Over half of them worked in fishery. The rest of them were older, too young to do it. So it was an industry that dominated a place, right?
And where I live, like, there's no fish that you would say. There is no species where you just say fish and everybody knows which fish you're talking about. But here you say fish, even though you guys fish for other species. When you say fish in fishing, because you guys say troutin, for instance,
right? Which
I've never heard before. Because a little context here, you don't really have like a warm water fishery. So where we live, we have two freshwater fisheries: the cold water fishery, which would be our trout, our landlocked salmon, our cusk, our smelts. And then we have the warm water fishery, which would be bass and sunfish and pike and pickerel and things like that. Here, it's like salmon and trout in the waters, which is just which, as kind of a cold water fishery snob, I thought was really cool. Because down where I am, it's like there's all these fish that I just don't care for. But I feel like I'm being like prejudiced against them, and I should maybe fish for some perches here and there.
You can eat it, then you should fish it.
But but here you're like, ooh, I wouldn't even have to think about that. It's trouting. But when you say fishing, it refers to the cod fishery,
cod fishing,
right?
Yeah. And and everywhere you go, anyone would say we're having fish for supper, you'd never even question what it was. It was going to be cod, and still is. If we're having fish for supper, if you're having salmon, well, then you're having salmon.
Yeah.
We're having salmon for supper.
Right. Name it.
But other than that is, or if you're having mackerel, right?
Yeah.
But no, if you're having fish, it's codfish.
Tell people what it was like when in '92, and for a little context, and probably. I don't know if you've come across anything better or if you've read it, but Mark Kurlansky's book, Cod, which is just this incredible sort of history of the world told through the story of the cod fishery, and leads up to the collapse of that fishery. We've also experienced that down in Maine, so extremely limited at this point. It's not like there's no cod being fished, but it's extremely limited, right?
Yeah, and a lot of the, the quotas here and the size of the fishery has decreased, substantially, right? Where is very, compared to, there's a very small percentage of people now who still fish for cod like that. I mean, it just don't exist anymore compared to what it was. 500
years or so of heavy reliance and exploitation on that species from sort of the Europeans coming over. And it was the cod fishery that allowed, Europeans, like a lot of people don't understand how linked cod is to colonization of North America by Europeans, but without cod, the northern tier of North America wouldn't have been populated.
Of Europe.
So no, I'm saying like coming over here, like without a cod fishery, like the Northeast, like Cape Cod, for instance, in Massachusetts, right? I mean, this is like for the United States, our history as a country begins like sort of in Massachusetts.
Right.
Really, Maine had some early stuff, but I'm a little biased. But Cape Cod sort of being the center of all of that, that's where all that went down. And it's like I grew up hearing that and never thinking, oh, cod fish. It just was a place, Cape Cod,
Yeah.
What allowed people to set up here was the cod fishery.
Yeah.
And then over time, whether it's through overfishing or changing of environment or a little bit of everything.
Technology.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of fishing.
A lot of fishing. Once we had gone from an inshore fishery, which was all that we had here, right? We have a 200-mile limit on our cod fishery here. So we were small boat fishermen, right? I remember standing on the cliffs in Balleen where we lived, and I remember the boats coming in, what they'd say, filled to the gunnels, right?
Balleen,
yeah.
Yeah, like whale baleen.
Yeah.
A lot of whales. You can see them right from the coast here. It's amazing.
Oh yeah, and used to be a fishery here, right?
For whales.
Yeah.
Do you know which ones?
Well, it was whale blubber that they used to. Yeah. They harvested for all the lamps for everything. Like it was a.
Did you have sperm whales here though? Do you know or not sure? Yeah, I'm sorry. I expect everybody to know all about their local whaling, but I'm kind of a nerd about it. But you have northern right whales here.
Yep.
We see a lot of humpbacks. We saw minke yesterday.
Yep.
But anyway, sorry, I'm getting you off track. So
that's okay.
So there you were in Balleen.
Yeah, I was in Balleen, and I remember watching Dad's boat come in, filled to the gunnels with fish. I mean, there was more fish than you know what to do with. Mm-hmm. And if we had maintained that technology of fishing, we couldn't overfish. It's
hand
not
lining
even
from dories, basically,
hand
right?
Lining, yeah. Now, in Dad's time, they had traps, right? But
did they? They used traps.
Trap net, yeah. But before that, it was all hand line, right?
Yeah.
And now, the hand line fishery here. Well, you fish hand line because it's this. It has now risen in that chef world as the highest quality of fish you can get, and look at some of the stuff they're doing on Fogo Island over there with the Fogo Co-op for fishery, creating a premium quality product that can go out into the market, and that is all hand lined. Mm-hmm. Hand lined as soon as it comes on board and it's bled, and then you have this beautiful product, right?
Yeah, like an artisanal
absolutely
kind of product. So I got you off track, but what was it like? Just what was the tone here in the early 90s when the fishery finally closed? And did people see it coming, or did it sort of come upon people with like as a surprise?
Oh no, they seen it coming.
Yeah.
They seen it coming. Yeah. The fishermen definitely noticed the difference in the amount of fish that was able to be caught, right? Because the trawlers were coming in and just eradicating such massive amounts of fish.
Bottom,
dragging and trap fishing, and the trawlers were able to do it at such a scale that
industrial fishing.
Yeah, it just devastated. And yeah, it was horrible, right? I mean, I was born in '77, and when the cod fishery closed, I mean, it was like I don't know, it was a very sad doom and gloom that came over this place, right?
Suicides?
Oh yeah, and I mean, it's still, right, horrible. I mean, I remember watching grown men cry on wharves, and you lost a sense of, and you lost a sense of who you were and what you did. And when humans take that emotional toll, it changes you forever, right? Your whole existence was taken away from you, as if wild food was taken away from you.
Yeah.
Right?
For
you, say, to try to relate.
Who am I?
Right. Yeah. What do I do now when I wake up tomorrow?
Yeah.
I don't need to mend the nets. I don't need to paint the boat. I don't need to go fishing. I don't need to dry the fish, salt the fish, get it to market. So what do you do all day in a community that is, that was what made that community go round, right? Yeah. And I mean, it was a horrible time, right? And we've risen out of it mostly with, economically with oil.
Offshore oil rigs, right?
Yeah.
A friend of yours that you introduced us to recently was just getting ready to head out in the morning for 3 weeks on one of the oil rigs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of people finding employment there then. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. But only those, you had to have that skill to, keep up in that kind of world. And we lost a lot of people left Newfoundland for work, and they never came back. They went to Alberta.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Also to work oil out there, I imagine, tar sands.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, it was a time that you'll never forget. Now, my kids won't know nothing about it.
Yeah.
Right? But everywhere you go, it's still talked about.
Yeah.
Like, it's still everyday conversation you turn on.
How so? Like what kind of things?
They're still fighting for more quotas. They're still fighting to find out why the population hasn't bounced back.
Yeah.
The sealing comes into it. The conversations around how much seal, how much fish that the seal are eating.
Yeah.
You turn on the radio every day, hear in the news. You got fishermen fighting for their quotas and fighting for legislation and fighting for things to change, and why hasn't things changed? And
then there's like a belief then amongst some folks that like the cod might come back, or they might bounce back, or they're somewhere else, or just a hope that it's gonna somehow be restored.
I think everyone knows that it'll never come back like it was.
Okay.
Right. But there's still people that make a living on it, right? From crab and herring, redfish and codfish, and so.
You got redfish up here with big buggy eyes, little guys that you're talking about. Yeah. Spiky spines on their back.
I mean, we never see it in the fish markets here. There's no market for it.
Yeah, they're a delicious.
There's
fish.
no market for anything here.
Yeah,
very little, right? I mean, people they grew up on codfish.
Yeah,
and we're not interested in haddock or pollock or.
So I want to talk about that for a second too. Back home, I participate in our ground fishery. Mm-hmm. Ground fish, for folks listening, are fish that are benthic. They live at the bottom of they live near the seafloor. And the gadiforms, which are the codfish family, include all these different species besides cod, the pollock, haddock, cusk, several other species as well that are in that same group. And all of them have really delicious, white, flaky meat. And when I started fishing in the ground fishery, we could keep a cod a day when we were out there, and then the following year that ended, and I haven't been able to keep cod since. We catch them in some of the places we go. Since the cod fishery is now restricted, there's actually quite a lot of cod, and it can become a hassle because you're like, oh God, another codfish on, and I'm trying to catch pollock now because that's all we can keep. So they become kind of a nuisance almost in a sense. And you hear the fishermen now are complaining about catching too much cod.
Oh my God.
Because, they got to put them all back.
Right.
And when you haul them up from the deep, the survival rate seems pretty low to me.
Yeah.
A lot of those fish don't make it back down to the bottom. Their air bladders are pushed, their stomachs out of their mouths and all this stuff. And in my mind, I have wanted to, this is what I'll always say. I don't know why people make such a big deal out of cod, pollock eat just as good, haddock eats just as good. Why was cod elevated to this position of like the king of fish when there's these other great fish too? And I could never understand that because I assumed people were catching these fish along with cod. Now I'm kind of seeing that, well, one thing that's gone on is in the absence of cod, some of these other species have become more prolific. So there probably are more of them where I am than there used to be. But then we went out the other day with Larry, Larry didn't seem to me like he had like one mode of talking. He wasn't doing the fancy talk to us and then the regular talk to you. He was like, I don't want to say strain because I was so entertained by how he spoke, I mean, he was just a hoot to listen to, but he seemed like the quintessential Newfoundland fisherman. Yeah. And he took us out, what you called the gut.
Yep, the kitty vitty. Out of the gut.
Kitty vitty.
Yeah.
It's Q-U-I-T-T.
No, Q-U-I-D-I.
Oh, okay.
Separate word, V-I-D-I.
Yeah, kitty vitty. When you were saying it to us, I was picturing it spelled differently than we saw it on the sign. So we went out of kitty vitty and went through some real rough seas in his boat, small boat, not a dory, but kind of in that same style as those. I saw a lot of those dories around.
Like a skiff, right?
Yeah, like a big skiff, big fiberglass skiff. And we went out there and had a great hour of cod fishing. Yeah. He was feeling bad for us because the fish weren't gigantic fish or whatever. But every time we cast, and a different rig than I'm used to. So here we were fishing these spinning outfits with these very short, stout rods and these big, probably 8,000 class reels, I'd say, and casting much smaller jigs than I'm used to. Although you were hand lining a jig more like what I use. But every time we cast down, or not cast, but drop the line down, I mean, as soon as we were there, it was like fish and bring it up. And
we were, we weren't half a kilometer offshore.
Yeah, well, that was what was so interesting to me. I'm used to a 2-hour steam out to where we fish.
Right.
So heading out to offshore ledges.
Right.
It's expensive because of that fuel. We get out to where we lose the last points of land, the last mountains we can't see anymore, and we're just surrounded 360 by blue. So the idea of an inshore cod fishery was just amazing to me. I mean, we went 5 minutes out, 10 minutes out or something, and there we were. Couple things, though. I want to give some context of why that was going on, but I also want to explain for people who are like, wait, I thought you just said there's no cod fishery left. Okay, let's describe what exists still in the cod fishery.
Right. So as a resident here, of Newfoundland and Labrador, they open a recreational fishery. So we called it a food fishery here. So I can go out every weekend and I can catch 5 fish a day this year. They've changed it a little bit off and on, but that's the purpose of that is for me to fill the freezer with food.
Subsistence
right.
stuff.
Yeah.
Subsistence, and I get the impression some heritage a little bit there too, right?
Yeah, it was I don't know, it was kind of one of these things they, gave it back to us, I guess. Yeah. As I roll my eyes. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it seems like that with that type of technology and those small numbers, and what I've never seen before, in my limited experience, being involved in fisheries, was that this is regulated by the day. So was it like Saturday, Sunday, Monday you can fish?
Yeah, same as last year was also on the weekends. You could fish on the weekends, and then that's it during the week.
Okay, so the cod get 4 days of a break from this.
Yeah.
And
there's really no rhyme or reason to it, right? Yeah. People are off mostly on the weekends, and there's a weekend fishery. If they open it only during the week, people lose their minds because they were like, "I'm working, I can't get fishing," and yeah. And the reason the cod are in so close is because they chase the bait fish in. So the bait fish is Capelin here, and so the Capelin comes in, the cod comes in, the whales come in, everything's in. Right?
Yeah. So when you picked us up at the airport, and we start driving along the coast. And immediately you're pulling over to the side of the road to look over the edge there down those cliffs to see what's going on the beach. So we get out to look. Now, capelin are in the smelt family. Osmeridae, I believe, is the family. And so this is a fish, probably about 8 inches long or so. Real silver-sided fish, like maybe kind of how you'd picture a sardine or something like that. Yeah. Little smelt fish. And this was a phenomenon I've never heard of. This is a fishery I would like to participate in at some point. These fish are coming into shore to spawn, but do you guys call it rolling in?
Yeah, so when the capelin rolls.
Capelin rolls. Okay, so we'd say maybe like when the smelt are running. You guys say when the capelin rolls.
Right.
We saw so many shirts downtown that had a picture of capelin and say how I roll. So this is how I roll.
So yeah, they roll because they come in on the sandy beaches to spawn, and then they just roll in literally with the waves.
So they're like literally rolling up onto the beach, and we saw people out there with dip nets just scooping them up. And photographs, black and white photographs. I mean, it's kind of like the difference between when you know, us fishing cod the other day and coming back with 10 versus you see the pictures from 100 years ago, black and white, where the whole dock is just covered in giant codfish, right? I saw some photos where there are just tens of thousands of capelin up on the beach. So I assume the abundance is much less than it was in the past.
It is. They're really watching the capelin fishery now. There's a decline in the capelin. People commercially harvest capelin, but what we seen the other night was a tradition for people. So when the capelin roll, everyone gathers their kids and you go down to the beach and you catch capelin. Okay, so most people that are down on, there's hundreds of people on the beaches when this is happening, usually in a couple of really popular spots. And they're usually not taking home capelin to eat, right? It is just a tradition. You go, you light the fire, it's a buzz, it's exciting, the kids love it. You'll see lots of people take capelin home, but you usually only take home enough for a couple of meals, right? Yeah. Then in Mom's time and Pop's time, the capelin were really important because that's what they got to put up in the gardens for fertilizer. That's why they were taken from the beach. The land here, the soil is so poor here that...
And thin.
Yeah. And I mean, there's lots of places there's absolutely no soil. Yeah. But in some places it's like 6 to 8 inches. I mean, it's just enough for a bit of greenery to grow, right?
Yeah, I didn't mention, but like out in those barrens, it's like as much... it looked like glacial erratics and stones, as much of that as there is foliage
water
almost and water.
And bog and
it's a very significant part of the landscape is that there's a lot of exposed rock.
Yeah. Well, they call this place the Rock, right?
Yeah.
So, but the capelin and kelp, and that was two of the biggest harvested things from off the beach. Yeah. And they would build soil with kelp and capelin and kelp and capelin and decomposition, and they would plant right in it, bring sand up from the beach.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. So with the capelin coming in, you'd see the birds are working offshore or sort of on the water, and then you'd see the humpbacks are breaching up, coming up and grabbing big bait balls of it, and the cod have come inshore. Now, is there a cod fishery inshore like this when there's no capelin, or is it just because the capelin?
No, they're not in that close then anymore.
So what we got to do the other day is an artifact of the capelin.
And it'll only happen like for these couple of months.
Yeah, so it's really neat to get to be a part of that. So back to where I was originally going with this, which is that I've always said to myself, like, I kind of want to elevate pollock in people's minds. I think it's a great eating fish, and it is a great eating fish. But this week I had kind of, based on your cooking, I realized sort of one of the differences. But before I say that, you cooked a couple things I hadn't had before. You cooked cod tongues.
Yeah.
Wow, is that something good? It felt to me like foie gras in a way. No, that's not quite right. It was. How would you describe it?
I heard you say something about like it was more tender than a scallop.
Way more tender than a scallop.
Oh yeah,
almost like liquefies in your mouth.
Yeah, it does.
So I saw you cutting those out, like kind of like, what is she gonna do with those? And then because they have their skin on and everything, but you just fried them up. I don't remember ever being like, oh, I'm chewing the skin of the tongue or anything. Just melts in your mouth. Can you describe sort of? You said that was like the delicacy that
yes, all the young fellas would be down on the wharf cutting the tongues because the heads would come off the salt, right? So the heads come off the fish is split open, the sound bone is taken out, and then the tongues and the cheeks were then put aside, and the young fellas, like 8, 9, 10, 12-year-olds would cut the tongues, and then they would go around sell them in the communities. Yeah. So to us, that's what the treasure was in, right?
Yeah.
And the napes and the cheeks and the heads. I mean, we always had cod heads too. It was delicious, right? That's we did actually.
Yeah, so you took a cod head, and what I noticed you did is you removed the lower jaw, the tongue was out already, and then you took the lower jaw off, and then you sort of just cracked it so it flattened out, like you cracked it along the sort of midline. Yes.
Like a spatchcock, I guess.
Yeah, you like spatchcocked the cod head, and then you just maybe sprinkled it with flour, and then fried it up in oil over the fire, and man, just watching it cook.
Now, not a deep fry. Let's be clear here.
Yeah, pan fried it.
Pan fried.
And oh man, it was looking so crispy on the outside, and I ended up eating. Because I was interested. Initially I was like, oh, the cheeks. I like because I'll just cut those cheeks out like a little medallion,
right.
But I was like, oh, I'm gonna eat those. Before I know it, I'm eating the lips off of this fish. I'm pulling meat out of every crevice of the skull. I'm eating the eyeballs, like all that meat on the head. And then it occurred to me what the difference is. Why cod is unique in the gadiforms is that the skin. It has no scales. Like a pollock has scales that are about half the size of your pinky nail, and you'd have to scale it if you were going to do this.
Okay.
Yeah, and with the cod skin is
it's the best part.
Doesn't really have. I mean, I'm sure it has scales, but that are probably embedded in microscopic or something. But I mean, it feels smooth, almost like an amphibian's skin.
Yeah, I mean, now when you go in to buy fish, all the skin is taken off it, right? Modern day people don't eat the skin, even though you and I know that that's where all the nutrients is, right? But to me, that's the best part. If you're going to eat, well, the fillet is not the best part of the codfish, right? It's the head, the cheeks, the tongues.
But you cooked the fillet skin on too. I remember when we were Larry was cutting the fish on the dock, and I was thinking, why is he not going to skin those? And then I was like, because to me, when I skin the pollock because of the scales.
Right.
And if I put all of my fillets I'm saying fillet now. If I put all my fillets in a bag like you did, I don't like it because the scales get on the exposed meat surface, and then you got to clean it really well. Then you cooked it like that. I don't remember taking the skin off. I think we just ate all that.
You ate it all.
Oh, it was good. Crispy and...
that gelatinous layer of fat between the fish,
all those omegas
the
are.
fillets,
Yeah, because the meat of these fish, they're white fish, so the meat is not real rich in omegas. You could eat cod all the time and not get any omegas, really, any significant omegas from it.
There's some interesting studies going on now about people, the reason why we're depleted in some of these oils, right? No one eats the skin of the fish anymore.
Yeah, right. And you got that fat layer right under the skin there where the good stuff is.
Man, have you ever scaled a pollock?
No, but now I'm going to.
That,
yeah, well, now because I want to cook the head, so I'm thinking I'm going to scale their
the
heads.
scales on the head?
More work.
Well, I got a good scaler. What's that?
Is the scales go up on the head too?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
Now I'm going to really be paying attention,
Right.
so I'll get back to you on that. We had a funny little anecdote is that where they were cutting them, all the carcasses, so they take the fillets off, throw the carcasses in the water, and we had I'm like a tourist come from here, but this tourist woman came up and she's trying to figure out what all these dead fish are that she's seeing in the water. So what does she say to us?
What happened to all these fish?
Yeah, like she thought like there was some kind of seismic event or some kind of fish die off, and Laura, you're telling her like, oh well, the fish have all been filleted, and then those are just the carcasses, and she goes, oh right.
But there was that blankness.
Yeah, like she didn't get it. She's like, but why are they there? And so finally I have to I just laid it out for her. I was like, the meat on the side of the fish has been filleted off and removed, and that is the now meatless fish carcass that is in the water.
Yeah, and you even use
hand gestures
to show her what had happened. Because I was looking at her with this confused look coming back from her, going, I don't know, I don't understand. What part you don't understand.
That's funny. There's so many foods that we experience here. Before I jump off cod, have I left anything out or left any loose threads here? I feel like
not that I can think.
All right,
of.
I tied a bow on that. It's 9:30. We got to experience quite a few other really beautiful foods here that I want to make sure we talk about. There are caribou here on the island.
Yep.
I feel so bad to say it again, like a population on a decline, it sounds like. So it's such a common story. But there were no other deer here. There are no white-tailed deer here. That surprised me.
No.
But there are moose, which were introduced here,
Yes.
but are now so prolific that, as you've told me, people don't like to drive at night here.
No, and the highways are not lit here either, right?
Right.
So, I mean, we see it all the time. They usually cut back like 500 feet or whatever from the highways just so that you can see them coming, which kind of has the opposite effect because then all the young growth comes up and that's what they come out to get.
They come out to eat that,
Yep.
yeah.
But yeah, the numbers are staggering here now. The
Of
amount
moose.
of moose, yeah.
You look at the landscape and it looks so perfect for moose.
Yeah, and there's no predator for them, right? We don't have a Newfoundland. We used to have a Newfoundland wolf. We have lots of coyotes now, but they can't take down moose like that. But there's a new breed on the rise of coyote that's bred with the Quebec wolf, coming across Labrador and then coming down the ice flow. So, and that's how they're getting here. And so we'll see what happens. But we have a large hunt here every fall of the year, and we don't really hunt sport here. People come in, it's a large outfitting business here, mostly in Labrador. People come in to hunt it as a sport, but Newfoundlanders don't sport hunt.
Yeah.
We
Meat hunt.
And it's, if you don't get your moose, your friends will and your family will take care of you. It's like so-and-so didn't get his moose, and that's like a big deal.
Okay.
Right?
Because it seemed like the moose was pretty well integrated into the culture here at this point.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. At one point, they were only out in Central. They brought him in out in Central Newfoundland when they were building the railway for meat, right, to feed the workers. And yeah, well, like you say, the landscape here was perfect for him, right? And I mean, it got to the point where they were devastating the national parks.
Okay.
Of spruce and trees complete,
Just browsing it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And there's actually a hunt in the park now.
Oh, wow.
To bring the
Yeah.
It's worked because it's brought the numbers way down.
The something Grant and I had lamented was that every time people serve us moose, it's usually cooked to death, and braised or whatever. So I shouldn't say cooked to death, but it's usually in a stew.
Yeah.
Or something like that, and you cooked us some rare loin over the fire that day we were fishing, and man, was that something special.
It's a beautiful meat, right? I think it's definitely been underlooked or overlooked as a prime source of meat, right? We mentioned that this is the only place in Canada where you can legally serve wild game. You can legally buy it from a hunter if you have
such a unique aspect.
And they're
restaurants
not
are
farmed.
serving wild moose.
Yeah, and yeah. So, but the it hasn't risen in any kind of way as a premium meat. It's getting there. Some people are especially in the restaurant industry. We have embraced it and we'll serve it as much as we can. Any of those food events that are going on, you expect to see moose here now, and you expect to see it not long and slow and not braised like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's still, pulled moose burgers and ground moose, but lots of people.
Which is great. I mean, I'm not going to complain about that either, but I mean, eating it like you served it the other day was some of the best venison I'd ever had.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's beautiful.
We're all looking at each other like as the supply on that cutting board was starting to dwindle down, and it's like everybody's sort of like, it's like one of those like last stand moments in a like a shootout movie or something.
But it didn't. I mean, you take years ago when meat was brought back. Lots of times that meat just hung up out in the shed. In Mom's time, there was no refrigeration, right? So you had to cook everything to death for that reason, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't, for the bacteria and stuff that was growing, everything was, well cooked.
Sterilized.
Exactly.
You also have been saying, I've heard this from you several times this week, is that there really wasn't so much differentiation between cuts of meat either. Like, so we have this culture now, this culinary culture, like you were talking about, sort of the world food scene, and there's tremendous distinction, and I guess probably the French culinary influence, where tremendous distinction between cuts.
Yeah.
And certainly when I prepare, I don't care so much like which cut of the ham it is, for instance, when I cut a deer, because they all eat like tender steak,
Yeah.
But like hams, back straps, tenderloins, that stuff to me is my prize stuff. I eat that rare, and And if I'm gonna braise stuff, it's the neck,
Yeah.
or maybe the shoulder meat, or I'll grind that. But you said it, and sort of back in the day here, people just sort of everything went into the pot the same way. Loins are going into the pot.
Absolutely. And it's not even back in the day. 99% of people who harvest a moose now, it's chopped up on the bandsaw, and it doesn't matter what shape it is and what size it is. It's all, and there's no distinguish between the cuts, right?
You were saying your dad wouldn't eat rare moose if you cooked it for him?
Nah, wouldn't be bothered. He'd say, no, not bothered. But because it was all going in the oven and cooked like that, it didn't matter what the cut was, right?
Yeah.
And it was true subsistence eating, right?
Yeah.
But now, when I got involved in the hunt, and I guess just from my background and, in that culinary world, that I wanted to start, again, pushing the boundaries of what could be done with it. So now I'm making brezola out of the eye rounds, and I have a list now. It goes up to the butcher in Plum Point, and I'd say, to say the least, he was surprised when we, handed over this list of cuts, because no one's ever done
asked for that. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot more work too, right?
Yeah.
Most of the butchers don't want to do anything with it. The boys will drop the moose off, and I once 800 pounds of it turned into sausage or turned into ground, right? And lots of people now drop off the moose, ground and sausage. That's it, half and half.
It's so hard to hear that.
I know.
Those back straps, man, are so good.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. And while we ate those, we were out. This was sort of a surprise to me because I hadn't expected to do this while we were here, but we were fly fishing for wild Atlantic salmon. And I didn't know there was a fishery. I live in a country where wild Atlantic salmon are on the endangered species list. They're just off our menu. We can't fish for them. We, like you, have a landlocked salmon fishery, eastern salmon, but no wild fishery. So here, that fishery is also regulated in a really interesting way. We went to pick up my fishing license, and I bought a total of 6 salmon tags, color coded. So they were pairs of different colors, red, green, I think, and maybe a yellow or blue.
White, I think.
Okay, so those were each color was for a different river, I think, or a different water system. And then I was told we were fishing on what would be the red tag.
Yes, yeah.
And then I was told, well, even though you got 2 tags, you can really only use one of them.
Right.
And what you have are fish coming up to spawn. And for those who are used to West Coast salmon, our fish don't die after they spawn. Some do, but they don't spawn out like Western salmon do. They can head back to the Atlantic and start the whole process over.
Yeah.
When they come into spawn, they're not really eating.
No, that's frustrating.
So you've got this fish coming in. This fish is not eating. Now, additionally, to handicap the fishermen, you've got fly fishing only and barbless hooks only. So I am not a fly fisherman, and or I'll say I have pretty limited experience. I don't feel real confident with it, especially if you're going to take the barb off my hook, and then you tell me, well, the fish also isn't eating. It's like, well, what am I supposed to do?
But you can see them.
But you can see them.
That's
6 feet off, right?
All right, so I'm fairly obsessed with this species. Here I am. I didn't even know that I was going to get to do this. Suddenly, I've got a wild Atlantic salmon tag in my pocket. This is, again, at home an endangered species, but here there's enough of them for this fishery. I'm looking at the salmon. They're 10 feet away from me in water that's not even up to my waist. Yeah, big, beautiful. I could have taken a dip net and grabbed them, right? They're right there. And I'm throwing flies at them for hours, and they aren't even, but occasionally one will just shift a little bit in the water column, and everybody goes, ooh! Like, oh.
You rose him, look. Yeah.
And then everybody tells me, well, even if you rise him, then you got to still get him to eat. If he does eat it, now you got to fish on a barbless hook with a method that I'm not real comfortable with, where I got to keep so much tension on that line in order not too much tension. Everybody's telling me all these things I got to remember, and I'm thinking, there's no way I'm going to land. So I felt like what I did this week was practiced my cast.
Right.
Which got really nice.
Thank you. It got better as the time went on. I wouldn't say really nice, but it got better than it started off. I practiced my cast, and what I did was got it in my head to come back sometime and fish.
But
for
no
him.
one on the river where we were caught that day. See, so
Thank
you
you.
could,
Thank you.
right?
Yeah. It wasn't just me not catching. We didn't see any fish get
I think
caught.
you got a bite though.
I love it.
We actually we were reviewing footage last night, and we saw that one of the fish. So there goes my fly by it, and then right after he comes out and he sort of fins out.
Nobody saw it in real life.
None of us saw it happen.
Oh no way!
I was filming it,
but we caught it in the footage last night. But anyway, I'm real excited about that fishery. I want to come back and participate in it. So I'm bringing one of those tags home as a little reminder to myself.
To come back.
To come back.
We'll get you out on the west coast, out on the exploits. The rivers out there are spectacular.
Yeah, cool.
Do you want to talk about the Sebago?
Yeah, yeah, that's one of the interesting things. Grant and I live. Grant lives right on the lake in Maine, I think probably the second biggest lake. I think Moosehead's the biggest lake in Maine, and then Sebago Lake. Well, the landlocked salmon was named. It's had many scientific names over the years, Linnaean names, but its current scientific name is trinomial because they're a subspecies of salmon. So eastern salmon is Salmo salar, and the landlocked salmon is Salmo salar Sebago, named after Sebago Lake, where we both live. But our population in Sebago is now, it's not depleted, it's that it's not spawning naturally anymore, so they're stocking it. And we got up here, and you just have all these wild populations of landlocked salmon, which you guys call by the indigenous name.
Winonish.
Winonish.
Yeah, the Winonish.
Winonish.
Yeah.
So that's your landlocked Atlantic salmon, who live alongside brown trout, which are brought in from Europe originally, brook trout as well. Yeah, so they're sort of part of your trout fishery here. Because catching landlocked salmon is trouting. Yeah.
If you were, because you don't go anywhere separate to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Go on
and
the
same basic methods and everything. Yeah. So anyway, so that's something we'll be back for.
And those are wild populations, right?
Yeah. So this isn't a place where they're like the hatcheries are stocking away or anything.
No, I mean the salmon fishery is so highly regulated, right? And again, you turn on the radio and you're hearing about the impact that aquaculture is having here on the landlocked salmon and on the Atlantic wild salmon, and it's highly controversial.
Yeah, I could hear that amongst the all the fly fishermen on the shore were talking about it.
Right, and there's the gripe. Oh, that's the
fear that the aquaculture salmon are going to impact the wild Atlantics. Yeah,
lots of the aquaculture now happens on the southern shore of Newfoundland, and it is growing rapidly, right? And it's fought for by communities because it's a source of work.
Yeah,
and it is highly the regulations around aquaculture now are insane, right? Yeah, and they are quickly trying to figure out how we are going to grow enough fish to feed the world, right? As you know, right? And one of the biggest problems is if you put them up on land is they're so energy intensive.
Right.
And energy here is expensive and getting more expensive all the time. So it doesn't lend itself to a system where people are interested in starting, right?
So instead they're net raised out at sea.
Yeah.
Where obviously they're able to interact at some level with wild fish, and the byproducts of that fishery end up in the water.
Yeah.
Right, so you must end up, so everything from diseases in the farmed fish to sea lice in the farmed fish to genetic movement between wild fish and obviously it's not impossible for fish to escape.
No,
or
they'll
things
say
like
that they're sterile. They're this. They give lots of reasons why we don't need to worry about it. But that doesn't give any. That doesn't mean anything to the salmon associations and stuff, right? We're fighting really hard to make sure that we maintain this wild salmon fishery.
It's always this balance. It seems like
isn't it? Hey?
It's the jobs versus the environment, and it's like, well, you can't just.
It can't be that simple.
It can't. Yeah, you can't prioritize jobs over the place that people need to live in order to have jobs. I mean, that doesn't make sense. But I understand how important jobs are and the economy is at the same time. But it's also like we have to grow enough fish because of how we've damaged the fisheries. But then if growing the fish is also still damaging the fisheries, then it's like then all you're left with is this farmed fish. And I know it's complicated. But anyway, I'm glad to know those fish are here. Now that we're starting to talk about this, you've been more than a gracious host. You've just brought us around to do so many things here. I'm sure you're ready for a break from us. We're getting ready to head out to the airport here today, but finally. But we've done a lot of things. We went to the coast the other day to forage sort of some seaweeds and some mollusks, and we harvested a lot of limpets, which are just like a very small, what would you say, the size of a quarter maybe, little mollusk that's on the rocks right there where the in tide pools and where sort of the intertidal zone. And then also the periwinkles, which are like a small snail, I believe an herbivorous snail, that are also in that intertidal zone. These are species that I've played with a little bit in the past, particularly the periwinkles, and thought to myself, wow, they're just too much work and it's not worth it. And then you did something with them, which I was like, oh, well, I think what I had done in the past is gather enough periwinkles to like sit down to a big meal, and then it's so much picking, where you need like a little pin or a very pointy knife or a little hook.
Now, Daniel, you got to think of them. They're just a little snack.
Yeah.
They're a little snack to keep you going.
So you did on the tailgate of your truck, right? You busted out a little butane stove, did some must have been butter, garlic, and we had foraged some lovage from the coast, and then and I guess some salt, and you just threw the limpets and I'll let you describe. You just threw them into the pan there.
Yeah, it was like a 3-minute process. Blast the heat, throw them in, butter, whatever you can put your hands on for flavor next to your truck.
Yeah.
And they're just a little tasty.
Maybe like 30, 40 specimens went into the pan or something like that, not too many. And then we started picking at that, and that
really good.
That was like something you're like, man, I believe, what was it that Chris had said?
You could eat a bucket of those.
Yeah, I could eat a bucket of those. Man, that was good. And the limpets just fell right out of their shells.
They do, yeah.
And they end up being about the size of maybe like a chickpea or something, right? About in size.
Yeah.
But like a flavor like between I guess like a scallop and a snail or something like that. Kind of chewy, but not like in a bad way, not in a way you wouldn't like.
Some texture there.
And with the butter and salt, I mean, just heavenly little seafood. And then I was taking those periwinkles just with the tip of my fillet knife, and they'd pull right out of there, and they're much bigger than you'd expect when they come out.
And they were small ones. Like if you get out snorkeling, you get them like almost the size of like a ping pong ball.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, geez.
And they're chewier when they get bigger like that.
Yeah.
You have to come back, Daniel, and go snorkeling.
Jeez, yeah, no, the water clarity here blew my mind. Everywhere we went, looking down into the ocean.
Oh, yeah, it's beautiful.
The amount that we could see, in Maine, which is really not that far away from here, but the water clarity is nothing like that.
It was all rock, right? I mean, you've seen as we look down, there's just hundreds of urchins.
Oh, my goodness, so many
and just
urchins.
this, aquamarine, color and the white coral. And, I mean, you go out snorkeling or, picking, and you can actually just pick urchins right from shore at low tide. Mm-hmm. Like walk out to your knees and you're just kicking them away, finding somewhere to put your foot down.
I was amazed because our same urchins, those green urchins, our fishery's been just totally exploited for the Asian market, for uni.
Right.
And Asian markets, I should say. We have depleted them tremendously. And here, it's like nobody's been touching them or something. I mean, looking over the boat.
There's a small harvest here for them, but they're labor intensive, right? You need a diver, you need to hire a dive team, and you need to run a plant and find workers to go to work in the plant. So I can see why there are some plants here doing it, not many, but it's such a expensive, labor intensive task. That's why I always say that. I'm lucky they haven't figured out a way to do it industrially yet.
Right.
They're going to start sucking up with some vacuum, and then that'll be the end of them, right?
Yeah,
same with
because
the periwinkles.
they were just everywhere. Yeah. Well, I mean, as we eat down the food chain, essentially, right, and we run out of stuff to eat, I could see the periwinkles being a thing in the future.
Well, in Nova Scotia, like there's a fishery farm in Nova Scotia. There's no fishery farm here. And the same thing, right? You have to pick them by hand. But I mean, you've seen we could grab a handful of those guys yesterday.
Oh, you did. You were just reaching down between rocks and coming out with, a handful brimming with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing.
And then putting them in your pocket.
I know. I was thinking there's a soft shell crab in a boot somewhere still.
What happened to that crab?
We never ate him. We forgot him.
Did you put that boot back on?
I did. Yes, I remember finding that little guy.
Oh, poor guy. Anyway, I will be doing that recipe. I'll be cooking those at home the way that you did. So that was really inspired by that. There's quite a few tips and tricks and things I've picked up while being here, in addition to the immersion in the culture and all the great food. There's like a lot that, Grant and I will be replicating back home. I also want to talk about one of the highlights for me was we went out and met a skipper friend of yours who runs a company called Ocean Quest. Quite an operation he has. I saw several boats, lots of great branding. They had and they were bringing out a group of divers.
That's right.
So these are scuba folks. There was folks doing regular scuba, one guy with a rebreather, one guy with a pretty incredible camera setup. So these are divers at all the different skill levels that appeared. And they were doing a multi-day dive trip.
Yep, you can get PADI certified here, see? So you can actually come here, spend a week, do your certification, and they'll take you out. We've got world-class diving. People come from all around the world to dive here. Come back to the clarity, right?
Yeah, and I was surprised at the richness. Looking at some of the underwater footage, just really impressed with what they were seeing, the anemones and things like that. Very cool. But yeah, they seem like a great outfit if somebody wanted to get PADI certified. I mean, what a fun place to do it. So we went out on their boat, and you offered to do a meal for them, right? So you brought out a nice
That's how it goes around here.
Okay, so you
I'll feed you guys.
Right.
In exchange.
That's your end. And they kind of diverted and changed their trip for us a little bit and did some scallop harvesting.
Yeah.
So scallops are another fishery here, and which you said is more of a recent thing, like that they weren't really used or exploited in the past.
No. There's a commercial fishery for them, but we were operating on a recreational license, so we could, as a resident here, you could harvest 50 a day. That just not allowed to sell them.
Blew my mind, 50 a day.
But there's no one at it, right?
I know.
So you haven't got to worry about impacting.
They're so good. I'm not like 50 a day. Oh my God, that's terrible. I'm like, oh my God, you can get 50 a day.
We've never eaten them here growing up. I mean, you couldn't get them, right? I mean, Rick is the only dive operation in the province that I know of. Been here forever. And as a there's just not a lot of people. There's only 100. There's only 500,000 people on the island. So.
Right. Yeah, and only so many of those are going to go out and do that.
Yes, right.
You don't know what you don't know, and it's always this. You find out about something that you thought you had some handle on and realize you don't know anything about it, and that's how I feel about scallops. I eat a lot of mussels back home, and when you open a mussel shell and you take out the mussel, you've got that little adductor that stays in the shell, and I'm the one who takes like a spoon or something and a fingernail, and I'm always scraping those out. I like that chewy bit, and I've always been like, okay, the scallop appears to be and is that adductor muscle, just much bigger. I was not prepared for what a scallop is, so. But before I go there, I'll set the tone here. What happened was, so we had a lot of folks who'd never scallop dive before, and Rick set up like a little competition. So there was 2 buoys, an orange and a white buoy. They had a line running down to like a basket net that they sort of suspended just above the bottom, I assume. And he set up 2 dive teams of 4, and they went down and had a little friendly competition who could get the most scallops.
Right.
So, we're up there on the top of the boat, breathing a little diesel, hanging out. I'm kind of just excited to see what's going to happen, waiting. I'm seeing the buoys shaking in the water as they're filling up these baskets. And then finally the divers start coming up, and then the baskets come out. And they were just loaded down. I mean, they were in the water for maybe half an hour, and they came out with, I think, probably a total of what we kept, because they put back a lot of small ones. But I think there was a total of over 30, 35 maybe, because you and I shucked those out, and that took us a while. These scallops, so the shells were, the size of that small plate, not the big plate in the dinnerware set, but that smaller plate, or some were even bigger than that.
8 inches, 6, 8 inches.
Yeah, some of them, like those ones that we left out last night, must have been more like on the 9, 10 inches. So big shell. And when this thing is opened up a little bit, along the margin, what you might call the skirt of this animal. So if you can picture, like, for me, I was picturing the inside of a soft shell clam. You've got that sort of skirt bit. Mm-hmm. All right, let me back up even more. When I eat a clam or a mussel, I look inside there. It's barely an animal to me.
Right.
I get that it's like animal tissue, but I don't have that sense of like I'm eating something with a face. It's just, I feel more compassion for a grasshopper or something than I do for a clam, because it's just this like blob of, it looks like something you'd spit out.
It doesn't look like it has any intellectual.
No, there's no like, yeah, exactly. I'm not like feeling its consciousness or experiencing that. pick up this scallop and I look in, and there's
and he's looking back at you.
80 eyes. 80 eyes. Like, I remember this happening to me with queen conch in the Bahamas when one of them stuck her eyes out there, like on long, kind of like a snail would have the eyes at the end of like long little what look like antenna, and they sort of slinked out of the shell looking back at me, and I looked into those eyes, and I had the experience of looking into something's eyes.
Yeah.
And I didn't stop me from eating those conch, but it gave me this feeling like of respect for this animal. But a scallop, these ones here have lots of eyes on both the top and the bottom. And I did some reading on the boat. We had some phone service there, so I'm like Googling that, right? Eyes of scallops. And what I read was that they have a unique eye in the animal kingdom, and that they use mirrors instead of lenses, and that scientists are studying their eyes to develop better telescopes because their eyes work on the same technology or as our telescopes do. But I had this sense of like, oh, this creature is
has
conscious.
intelligence. Yeah.
And if you kind of put your finger into that shell, it snaps right down. I got my finger snapped in there, and we heard the footage last night. I'm all, ah! And then I look at your hand, and you just had this like purple bruise right across there. You never said anything about it, but so that really surprised me. Then so you would take a knife, work it into the back of that shell, sort of pop it.
Yeah, like a bit like you'd pop an oyster.
Right, and then you'd run a knife underneath that adductor muscle to separate it, because that's the thing that pulls the shells shut.
Yeah, on the flat side, because one side of the shells are flat, and the other side is more of
I didn't pick up that piece.
Yeah, so
that's why some of the ones I would cut, I'd leave too much meat on the shell, and other ones you would get a nicely clean cut. So you reach your knife in, and down to the base, and just like an oyster, you sort of give a twist to that knife, and it pops the shell enough that you can get in there. And then you just running your knife along and cutting that adductor muscle so you can split that shell open.
Right, yeah.
And when you get in there, what you have is that margin with all the eyes, this big roe sac.
Yeah.
And then the meat that we normally think of as a scallop, and a bunch of other stuff that I would just don't know the anatomy of.
Right.
What I know is that you kind of reach in there, grab all that, pull it away, and you're left with what looks like, okay, that's a scallop like I'm used to.
Still attached to the shell.
Which we then fillet out and put in one side. Now, most everybody else takes all the rest of that and throws that overboard, right? That's not really being used for anything.
Right.
But not Lori McCarthy.
She's taken that roe sack and that skirt, and they're in the dehydrator over there right now. So tell people what you do with those.
I'll leave them in the dehydrator. They take a couple of days, right? Because some of them are almost an inch thick when we took them out, right? Yep. They're and then 3 inches, 4 inches long sometimes, so they're quite big. They're not like you would imagine roe to be, right? So it's not a roe. It's not eggs, right?
Yeah, okay.
So I'll dehydrate them, and then I'll use them as...
Some were really, really pink, red, magenta, and some were cream colored. They were really different, too. Yeah. We were seeing 2 different colors.
Yeah, and then so I'll dehydrate them and use it and shave it on a microplane and use it as a flavor enhancer, almost like as a salt.
Okay.
Even,
right?
That's
neat. All right.
Yeah, and then I'll preserve them in... Sometimes I'll actually preserve them in salt and try like a Botarga method where you pack them in salt and then dehydrate them. But these ones are just straight into the dehydrator. And
the skirts, I saw that you had dehydrated, and that's the part with the eyes on there.
Right.
You had made into they're almost like little chips that you would use to flavor stock or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It seems like you have a real aversion to food waste and things that we ate, the cod tongues, the cod head, this roe. It's like stuff that normally gets thrown out. It's like you really like to utilize that stuff.
Yeah, but it's because it's a whole food source, right? Like we could sit down and eat just tongues and cheeks and heads and have a whole meal. And if you had 10 fish, we could... It just goes back to we sold the fillets because they had value, and we ate lots of fillets too. Don't get me wrong, but that's a whole meal.
Yeah,
right?
a delicious meal too.
A meal that if you go to any wharf now and look over the wharf, and there's hundreds of fish, and I just look down and go, that's hundreds of meals.
Yeah.
Like I could feed 100 people almost.
Right.
Let's throw it over a wharf right now.
So
there's no need to, right?
Yeah. Now back to our scallops. You had said to me, you're like, we're not cooking these. You're eating these raw. And I thought, I have no problem with that. I was like, yeah, there's no problem. I didn't expect, though, to be so because I've eaten raw scallops before, but never anything that had just come out of the water. I couldn't believe how delicious they were.
Right?
Sweet and buttery.
Like beyond
distinctly
sweet.
buttery.
Like it's almost, yeah.
Starts off salty,
Yeah.
and then it goes to that buttery sweetness.
Yeah.
Like I
Grant,
was saying, like you just know that it's food when you eat
Yeah,
it.
that really stood out to me.
And they're so cold. It's so
Yeah.
cold and
Yeah, that's true.
creamy at the same, yeah.
And that was an interesting observation, Grant. You were like kind of pointing out this just it feels intuitively like a natural human food.
Mm-hmm.
And I could have sat there and ate, except for the fact that they're so rich and filling, like they're surprisingly filling. I felt like I could have just kept eating and kept eating and kept eating those.
I mean, they're
so
bigger
good.
than the ones we ate were, I mean, most of them were as big as a ping pong ball, right?
Yeah, like a big marshmallow or something.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And then you also, once we got back with some, you did another dish last night that I thought was really great. Can you describe that?
Yeah, so we just took some butter, put it in the shell, and
Well, yeah. So the shell, put it in the shell.
Right.
So the shell, you keep these scallop shells and use them like plates.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, they're big enough too.
And then when we finish eating, you can just pitch them back out to the sea.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
And you
full.
cooked in it last night.
We did, yeah.
You
It's
did like a little frying pan.
Yeah.
It's surprisingly resilient to heat, like shockingly, right? It'll take, you can put that stuff right in there, those shells in right in on the coals of a fire, and they're perfect. So yeah, just melt some butter in it, and then I took some of the some dehydrated dulse. I put like a sheet of dulse, so the dulse was kind of poached.
So the
in
butter went right into the shell.
Yeah.
Laid that sheet of dulse on top of it.
Yeah, and then once it all went soft in the butter, the dulse, then I just cut the scallops up into quarters, and just kind of poached them in the like dulse butter.
All right, I gotta go deeper here. She raked a coal bed forward in her like beautiful brick oven in the backyard there, wood-fired brick oven. She raked coals forward, set that shell on those coals. The butter starts to like bubble inside of that shell as the heat gets through there. The dulse sort of melts into the butter and infuses it with these dulse is the best tasting seaweed for me, hands down. It's just, I love it. That flavor is infused, and then you quartered up the scallops, put them right in there. They infused into that, it kind of poached in there. Then you pulled that out and you garnished it off with a plant that we harvested on the coast you called oyster plant.
Yeah, yeah. There's also the sea lettuce we put on the top.
Oh, yeah.
Like the gutweed.
Yeah.
Another one that grows
Sea
right
lettuce
along
is a
the
real
shore,
nice flavor, too. I like that one a lot.
You just had didn't you have some sort of salt or no?
That's the green.
Yeah.
The green sea lettuce.
That's
We
the
just
sea
put it over the
lettuce.
top.
And yes, you had all these flavors of the sea in there. Man, that was a great dish. And what was I just
And
going to say?
the edges of the dulse got all crispy. It was so
Oh yeah,
that's
because
the best part.
after we ate the scallops, I was like pulling out those pieces of crispy dulse and sort of eating those, just trying to eat everything there. Grant tried to get me to drink the last of the butter, but I held off. That oyster plant was fascinating too because it was sort of it had that like sage color to it, that sage green.
That's one with the purple
flowers.
Yeah,
So
the
beautiful.
succulent
It
one.
grew real low and kind of creeping across the pebbles, right in through the pebbles on the beach there, the cobbles, and succulent stalk, but the leaves were so mild in flavor and distinctly for me tasted like the rind of watermelon. No bitterness, just so delightful to chew on, because wild plants often, as most people listening will know, are bitter or astringent or sour or whatever. They have something to repel eating. Right. This was like, wow, how does this plant get away with being so mild, you know? So you garnished that with the flowers of it, so gave it this like pop of purple and blue, you know, there's sort of an indigo color to some of them. That was just, that dish was also a highlight for me. What other foods did we eat while we were here? You know what you did I really liked is you took that caribou moss, which is a lichen, not a moss, but called that. This is one, you know, for people, I associate that for me more with alpine zones, that kind of a lichen where it's like kind of got maybe a coral type appearance to it, and if you step on it, it's real crunchy, crispy. They're very delicate, and we, you know, in our alpine zones, we have to be real careful because they can take so long to grow. You know, so you got something you step on and it takes 200 years to come back or whatever. So, but it has that same texture. Like if you take this stuff and you kind of crushed it in your hand, it just like you could powder it right down.
When it's dry, yeah.
Yeah. So you harvested some of that and you just kind of gave it a little fry. And fair to say a deep fry?
Yeah, because it can be upsetting to your stomach if you don't. Now, I don't know how much you'd have to eat for that to happen, but traditionally it was always boiled and used as a food source by First Nations.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, but you can, just give it a little fry.
Yeah.
It makes
for
it
some
really
texture
crispy.
on the plate.
Yeah.
Well, what's nice about that, is what Grant just said, the texture, because, I think high-level cuisine, part of it is having, each dish having like a range of textures, as well as colors, as well as flavors. And I'll often be lacking, especially when I work with wild foods, I'll be lacking in the texture part sometimes. So you sprinkled that upon our ptarmigan, I believe. Is that where we had it?
Yeah.
And that crunch, that crisp, there's like, it's very hard to get crisp without resorting to some kind of bready, carby thing. So it was really cool to get it from those lichens. So that's another thing I'm going to be stealing from you because...
do you have the same? You have the same ones in Maine?
I have to do a little research. We definitely have things that look similar to me, but I've never harvested that lichen, so I can't say for sure that we have that species. I wouldn't be surprised if we do, or something substantially similar that's non-toxic. So if so, I think we do. I really, really liked that. And it seems like, is that something you can harvest dry and still use that way? Or does it need to be fresh?
You damage it more when you harvest it dry, like you say, because it just completely crumbles. You walk out over the landscape and you'll just completely destroy it. Not that that's, the top of anyone's list when you're out hunting ptarmigan or anything.
Yeah, right.
But when you harvest it damp, I just really cut the top inch off it.
Yeah. But can you store it, though, and then use it later?
Yeah.
So you can still fry it once you've stored it?
Yep. Just bring it home and I dry it before I put it in like a mason jar or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I can use it all year.
Right. Well, I really liked that a lot. And we had also another thing that we did with plants that I really liked. And I know a lot of people do this, but I've never gotten into doing it. Is taking salts in the mortar and pestle and grinding wild foods into them that are maybe not wild foods, but like wild flavors, things you wouldn't necessarily like sit down to a bowl of. Like we did it with tamarack, larch leaves. So they're like a needle on a conifer plant, a leaf. They brought all this flavor into the salt.
Yeah, we did a juniper salt for the ptarmigan.
Another great example, because I like eating, nice ripe blue juniper berries, 5 or 6 or something like that. But it's not something you sit down and eat a bowl of the way you could strawberries or blueberries. But when you grind it into the salt and you get that moisture and the salty flavor, the aromas are feel like almost like they're locked in and preserved into the salt.
Yeah, it's a great way. It's a great way to keep that flavor, throughout the year until the fresh ones come out again. But just think, most of those flavors that we've been eating over the past few days, in terms of like wild vegetation, you can't get that again for another year.
Yeah.
Right. So you really have. It's like strawberry season or something. Say, and the same is here, like our wild strawberries, but. You don't buy strawberries or you have no other access to this stuff year round. It makes it all that much more special, right?
Yeah.
And the same with these flavors and these salts, like those juniper berries. You can pick them in the winter if you want to dig them up, I guess. But the blue ones fall. Yeah, you're not doing it right. The blue ones fall off into the ground, and so you have to pick the blue ones and then find some way to preserve it, right? It's like the lovage, and I was mentioning to you about the. You take 100 grams of lovage, you add 25% salt, you put it in the blender, and you add nothing but water just until it comes together. And then that'll sit in your fridge all year.
Okay, and then you get that nice flavor that's almost
punch.
Like got a bit of what you taste in the leaf of celery. Mm-hmm. A little bit of a bitter, but like a lot of like a saltiness.
Yeah.
And then, but like a potassium salt, not like a sodium salt. And then it has a bit of the flavor of parsley. I would say it's like a cross between parsley and celery. And you had it growing right, in dense colonies right along the coast there. That was an incredible flavor, and like a spice herb. And that was what's so nice about it, is that you have something local that you can use in place of parsley.
Right.
Or in place of celery. So, yeah, that was delicious. There are so many things here that I hope I can someday get to. I was joking with you that I see Newfoundland is less of an exotic trip and more of an expansion of my foraging range. That I want to come back here.
Yeah, you mentioned lots of times we were out that you have a species that looks very much like this, or you think you have this, but you haven't just explored it yet, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what this is for me. It's like an exploration of the land, right?
Yeah, and species here that we don't have as well, though. So I'm hoping to come back and participate in some of the other things here because there's, for instance, there's a caribou hunt. There's the seal hunt, which sounds like it's going to be a long way off for me to ever actually get to maybe hunt a seal, but I could potentially become an observer on a seal hunt. So that's like something that's real interesting to me. What else, Grant, did we come upon that? There's obviously the salmon fishery that I'd like to successfully participate in. So there's just like a lot of really interesting stuff here. There's berry seasons that we are here a little early for. So the cloudberry, which everybody's really talking about.
Yeah, the cloudberry is one of the first to come out. But just in this week that you're here, the crowberries are out. Yeah. The partridge berries are out. The crowberries are out. The baked apples are out.
Baked apple being what we were just talking about. Cloudberry.
Yeah. And the wild strawberries all have come out this week.
You have the same species, but much larger strawberries here than I'm used to. Ours tend to be very small, but we stopped, at least the spot we stopped at, where I was like, I'm getting out of the car because it was so big.
And I was like, no, they just might be the leaves. The leaves look red. He's like, no, I have this eyesight for strawberries.
I have a trained strawberry eye. I know what you mean, though, because you'll get those bright red sort of leaf bits that can look like big strawberries. Yeah, anyway, there's just so much to do here. Tell people about Cod Sounds and how they could potentially work with you if that's something they wanted to do.
So you can easily find it online at codsounds.ca, just like it sounds, of the cod and sounds.
Tell people what a cod sound is, too, so they know.
Right, so when the fish was split, the sound bone comes out, and the sound bone is the vertebrae tucked up along the spine of the fish, and the sound itself sounds disgusting, but it's a membrane of skin almost that is inside the vertebrae. It's the air bladder. It's what the cod uses for buoyancy. Mm-hmm. And when I was naming the company, I had told my mom, I had given her some of these names, and she was like not having it. Anyway, she broke into this.
What direction were you going with, like, before?
I don't know. We had narrowed it down to like 4 or 5, wild this or, whatever, right? And then Mom breaks into this story of how your grandfather, had nothing to do with the name. And she says, when your grandfather was fishing, they'd have all the sound bones. He used to keep all the sound bones and salt them. She's like, we'd come home from school and we'd like smell this cod sounds. We were having them for lunch because there was so much meat left on them. He always said it was too much to throw away. So in a time of true like nose to tail eating, nothing was wasted, right? So we kept the sound bones, and they were the treasured pieces for him, and using up and never letting anything go to waste. And to me, I just had that moment of Cod Sounds and what it kind of stood for in terms of how we relate to codfish, and how the codfish was the backbone of the fishery, of the people of Newfoundland. Right. It was, and it just became, I don't know, it just came together really well. And I was like, the sound bone, it's
cool.
Yeah.
It's really cool. And it's like bioregional, it's really neat.
It's like no one's ever going to have that name.
Yeah, exactly.
You can get the CA on that and
if
the
they did,
.com.
they wouldn't be legit. And so you kind of do foraging tours and food tours and stuff like that, folks.
Yeah. For me, it became about, sharing my journey, really, of what I was learning about the land, and hopefully inspiring people to participate in it, in that journey themselves, right? So whether it's, everything is about that relation to food. So if I'm teaching, sausage making, or it's that craft of food, the craft of curing, the, art of foraging, all that stuff, that lost art of skill, right? When it comes to food preservation and food technique. Yeah. Yeah, so people come from everywhere.
So you also do like technique stuff with people, kind of more like on the class or workshop
we
side?
do, yeah. I do workshops from the fall, well, the 2 months of summer here. That's when I mostly take people out onto the land, foraging. And the other months are all workshops.
Right.
So, yeah, people come and participate in the workshops.
Well, I can highly recommend
Rabbit hunting and...
Oh yeah, you do that as well.
I do. I call. There's a game butchery.
Oh, okay.
And there's a day out on the land, rabbit snaring, and my father-in-law comes with me and got all the stories, and up at the cabin actually.
Well, if you're not an annoying person, and you're interested in going to Newfoundland, sorry, I can highly recommend working with Lori. This place is amazing. There's so much to explore. I can tell that it's amazing probably throughout much of the year. And there's just a lot of really cool stuff to do out here. And it's a place that, much more than where I live, the connection back to the heritage piece that connects you to the food of the region is very much alive compared to many places I've been. And so if you've got a passion for wild food, for foraging, for foods of the sea, I just really recommend this place and really recommend working with Lori. Thank you so much for hosting us out here.
It was absolutely wicked to have you guys up.
Your Instagram handle?
Is at Eat It Wild.
Yeah.
Lori McCarthy, yeah.
Great. So check her out. It's Lori McCarthy.
Do you think we'll have time to eat some seal before we go?
Yeah.
All
Let's
right.
do it.
Great. Here we go.
Thanks, Lori.
You're welcome. It was awesome.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed podcast. You can help us grow this show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh, new content. Have a question you'd like answered on the show, or a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host us on? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out the WildFed video show and store. WildFed. Food is all around you.